everyone. This video is going to talk about migrating SQL Server always on configuration that's on physical hardware to the virtualized environment on Nutanix, and how AAG is going to help along the way with the migration. So pretty much the video demonstrates how you can do an end-to-end migration of your database workloads with always on enabled to a virtualized environment, and how AAG pretty much plays a key role in that migration. So as part of this demonstration, let me show my physical configuration. So I have basically an existing 3-node AAG that is actually on physical hardware. So the idea here is to add another node to the existing AAG, and this new node is going to reside on the Nutanix platform. Once the new node is registered on the Nutanix platform, we basically will use AAG to register that database server so that your data protection needs are also met by snapshot technology from an AAG perspective. Right. To do that, so there are certain prerequisites that need to be met. One of the key prerequisite is the new node that is going to be added to this always on configuration should also be associated with the Windows failover cluster. So to do that, I basically will go into the new node, which is the 163 IP here, and using the Windows add roles and features, I am going to enable, or I am going to install the Windows failover cluster on this new node. So this is pretty much the process for it. You enable the failover cluster here, you add the features here, and once you add the features, you basically need to add the new node to the existing Windows failover cluster. So this installation would ideally take a few minutes. So the process is pretty simple. You create the new Windows machine, and now to create, so since this feature installation is still running, I'm also going to talk about how AAG is used in this migration process itself, right? So this is the AAG UI, and if I go to the new sources, what I have done is, as part of adding this new node, you basically would have to create or provision a new single instance SQL Server. In a typical environment, every organization today ideally takes close to 4 to 7 days to provision a DB server. So what I have done here is basically provisioned a DB server named MIG AAG Node 3, and this provision was ideally done through AAG. And if you look at here, the time it ideally has taken to provision this new MIG AAG Node 3 server is around 17 minutes. So in a matter of few minutes, a database server has been provisioned, and this is the server that I'm currently installing the Windows failover cluster on. So if you look at it, the time that have gained by provisioning this database server using AAG is pretty much around 20 minutes as compared to around 3 or 4 days in a normal scenario where a lot of groups are involved, right? So that's how the database server was provisioned. So once the Windows failover clusters manager is installed on this new node or the new provision DB server, I'm going to attach that node to the existing cluster itself. So this might take a couple of minutes to complete. Once that's done, we'll attach it to the Windows failover cluster, and once that step is done, then we will start associating that node to the existing AAG itself. So if you see here, the installation is successful, so I can close this window out, and then I will ideally open the failover cluster manager. Let me just cancel it here. Let me just go back to the desktop, And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the primary node of that AAG, which is pretty much the, if you see here, this is the primary node of the AAG, where I already have the Windows Failover Cluster Manager open. Now if you see here, I have 3 nodes that are on physical. I right click on it and I say add node, and basically I am going to add the new node that I just had the Windows Failover Cluster software installed on it. So I'm going to put the IP here. I'm just going to say add. It's ideally searching for the server, and it actually figured out what the server name is, right? So I'm going to select that. I'm going to say next. Just does a pre-validation check, so you can just accept all of that, right? Run all the recommended tests and say next. If you want some cluster disk, quorum disk to be also validated, do that. Click next, and then click next to run the all the validation. So pretty much the validation is a step that basically helps you to make sure that all the prerequisites that are required for the Windows Failover cluster are met, right, for adding the new node. So if you look at here, you will see the progress of all the validation tests that are running. So it might take close to 2 to 3 minutes to complete these validations. So once the validations are done, all set to actually add this new node to the secondary, to the existing 3-node AAG itself. So let's wait for this to complete, probably another 3 to 4 minutes for it to get done. So I'm just going to pause here until this is done, and then resume my conversation itself. So if you see here, so ideally all the tests have passed, and I could just say finish here, and then I'm just going to say next to add the new node to the existing Windows Failover cluster. So the nodes have been added here, so I'll say finish. If you see here, my new node has already been added to the existing Windows Failover cluster. So since this new node is now available, what I'm going to do is add this new node to my existing always on configuration. So I'll probably go back here to my SQL Server. So if I see here on the always on availability group, I do have 3 nodes here. So all that I need to do is add the 4th node to this existing AAG. So however, to do that, one prerequisite that I also need to do is enable always on availability on the 4th node. So for that, what I am going to do is I'll remote login to the 4th node, and then I'm going to open the SQL Server Configuration Manager. SQL Server Configuration Manager, and enable the always on feature there. So go into SQL Server Services. I'm going to right click on the existing the properties of the server itself, go to always on availability group, and then they say click on this and then say apply, and then say OK here, right. So by that way my always on is enabled on the new node, and then I'm going to go back to my primary node of the AAG, and then I'm going to say right click on the availability group and say add replica, right, and then I'll say next. So this is asking me to connect to all the secondary nodes, right. So I'll say connect here, I'll say connect, and then I'll say connect here. So I'm successfully connected to both the nodes of the AAG. I'll say next here. Then here I'm going to say add the new node, right. Once I say this drop down here should ideally show me all the ones that are available. So I'll just say browse for more. Let's say database engine, I'll say network servers, so it's going to retrieve me all the available network servers, and in this list I should be able to see my new node that I had installed the Windows failover cluster on. So this might take a few seconds for retrieving the list of servers that's available on the network. So just let's wait for it to be displayed here. So it's displayed now. So under this list I have this MIG node, the one node that I was looking for where the cluster software was just installed. I'll say OK here, and then I'll just do a connection from here. Okay, if you see here it's saying always on feature is not enabled on the SQL Server instance. The reason is, even though I had installed enabled the always on configuration, the error is because the SQL Server Services was not restarted here. So I'm going to restart the SQL Server Services. Once that's done, I'll go back to my primary node, which is this, right, and I'll say connect again. So it's now connected here. So it's saying it's a secondary node, it's not readable, right, and then I could define it as any number of primary or secondary nodes, and then I'll say next here. I need to provide a shared path where the backups can reside. So on the primary server I have created the shared path that's accessible to all the nodes of the AAG, right. That's one prerequisite as well. You click next here. It's doing some pre-validations to make sure the AAGs is in a good health. So if you see everything is a success here, I'll say next, and then I'll say finish, and then this basically adds the new node to the existing always on configuration. So that way what I have successfully achieved is created a secondary replica on the Nutanix platform itself, right. If you see here, I have this new node added here. So using this new node, you can actually go and register that database server to ERA itself. So the process for that is you go into go to the ERA dashboard. You go to your sources, and then you say register. It's a single node database server, it's a SQL Server instance. You say next, and then in the drop down, if you see, you should be able to see that VM itself. It's registered here. So click on that. That's the database server that I want to register. You click next. And then it will ideally discover the database on that new node. Once it discovers the database, select that particular database that you want to register, and then run the process of registration. That's the database I wanted to register. I'll say next here. It's discovering the recovery model of the database, which is ideally it's going to be a full recovery model, and then define your SLAs, right. You could say brass, bronze. I'll say bronze here, so that I have 1 snapshots per day, and then my log catch-ups run for every 30 minutes. That's the frequency or the schedule that I'll set, and the log backups are going to be managed by Era. If you want other applications, you very well can do that, but in this case I'm going to let Era manage my backups, and then I'll say register. So so with this basically what it ideally does is it registers the database server. So if you see here, you go back in here and then so basically you will see that source database in here, or go to the Era dashboard. You have that AAG MIGRDB registered. So this way you also achieve the data protection needs for your organization by using Era. So pretty much Era is used as a provisioning mechanism, and also make sure your data protection needs are met by registering that secondary AAG node onto Era. So this way you run your production workloads till the day of cutover, right, where this node is still going to be the secondary node. On the day of the cutover, all that you have to do is basically failover. You basically do a failover of your primary to the Nutanix cluster. So in this case I want to failover to this node, but it does give me a data loss warning just because of the fact that I had set my availability mode as asynchronous mode. You can always go back and change it to synchronous mode and then do a failover. So not synchronized, so basically it's still in the process of doing a synchronize here. Click here to confirm there is a potential data loss. That's still fine. I want to make sure I am still caught up, right? So and then you say next, you do a connection here, Windows authentication, you say next and you say finish here. So basically the failover actually happens onto my new node that is actually running on Nutanix cluster. So that way and there is very little downtime, and so if you see here, it's a success. So, and if you go back to the availability replicas here, so the primary refresh that, and then if you see here, so basically if you see here, this node is your primary. Let me just connect to this instance and show you here, and then you go to always on availability groups here, this, and then if you see here, the new node that's on the Nutanix cluster has become the primary. And then as days progress, what you can actually do is you can go ahead and remove the secondary nodes from your physical infrastructure, and then you can actually add more nodes on the Nutanix cluster as secondary nodes itself. The process is still the same for that as well. The entire process that I just showed here can also be automated end-to-end using PowerShell, because there's a lot of commandlets within PowerShell that lets you create a Windows failover cluster, that lets you add a new node to the existing Windows failover cluster, commandlets to create or add a replica to an existing Windows failover cluster to an existing AAG. So this end-to-end can be run in an automated fashion, where you might have a lot of databases to be migrated in this fashion. Hope this demo was useful and helped you to understand more in terms of how you can migrate from physical infrastructure to the Nutanix platform, and how Era basically plays a key role in that. Right? Thank you.